Today we're going to be testing out the Stihl MS661 versus the Farmertech G660 Pro to see which saw is actually better.
To make this test as fair as possible, both saws will be running the same 25-inch Stihl Roll-O-Matic bar with the same chains in a Stihl 3/8-inch pitch 50 gauge cross-cut chain filed to 30 degrees. Both saws are being sharpened before any test cutting with the same file on the same sharpener. To start off, I'm weighing both saws with a full gas tank.
As you can see, the Stihl is 26 pounds. The Farmertech is 24 pounds. The first test here, we're going to see how many pulls it takes to start this chainsaw at a cold start. I've got it on full choke right now. The chain brake is on. Let's see. We got a fire.
So the first part of this cutting test, I'm going to be doing some felling with both saws, starting here with the Farmertech. All trees that I'm felling in this video are standing dead white ash trees, which are hardwoods. After that, I'm going to be racing both saws in a timed cutting test with the trees that I fell. One test will be with a large diameter log, roughly 25 inches, and then another timed cutting test will be with a smaller diameter log, just to see how the two saws stack up against each other. And like I said, they both are running identical chains and bars. Both chains are sharp. They were sharpened right before I did this cutting. So the reason that I'm cutting this tree so low is because it's a newly dead ash tree, and I think it's still maybe worthy of sawing lumber out of it. So I'm going to try to get a few saw logs out of this tree as long as possible. The other ash trees that I'm cutting after this are already too dead and rotten, so I'm going to be cutting those a little higher up from the stump just because at this point they're firewood and the length of the pole is not as important.
So my overall impressions of how this saw cut, it's very similar to the 661. It might not be quite as fast, doesn't quite have the chain speed, doesn't quite have the torque of the 661, but you get what you pay for. I mean, I bought this on 35% discount for $248, and it didn't come with the bar and chain, just came as the power head. But all things considered, for a $250 saw, it's a pretty good saw. The one thing that I can't measure in this test is how long it's going to last. I don't know if it's going to cut 5 trees and then just blow up, or if it's going to continue to cut trees for years after year after year. But either way, out of the box, it's a pretty good saw. I've burned about 5 gallons, maybe not quite 4 gallons of gas through it now, mostly milling. This is the first felling I've done with this saw, but yeah, my overall impressions, it's very similar to the 661, which I've done a lot of tree work with that saw, and that's a great saw, but it's not really apples to apples because this is a 660 clone, which would be the predecessor of the 661. So it's not as new of technology as the 661. So it's not really apples to apples, but all things considered, it's not a bad saw for what I paid for it. This is the last standing dead ash tree I'm gonna cut with the Chinese saw, and then I'm gonna cut one more tree with the 661, just so you can get an idea of what that saw looks like. And then after that, I'm gonna race the two saws and see how they stack up against each other in a large diameter hardwood, like 25 inches, and then another one in a smaller diameter hardwood, more like 10 inches.
Now you can't see in the camera frame here, but this is a tree that was snapped off in a storm. You wouldn't want to push a tree down like that. The only reason that I did that is because it was only a little taller than me, so not a very heavy tree to push over. Now I'm doing a timed cutting test starting with the Farmertech saw, and as you can see, my bar has not quite gone all the way through this log. I'm just shaving off the butt end of the log after I fell it. It's over 25 inches, which is my bar length. So on the Stihl cut here, I'm going to be cutting on the one side a little bit more first to ensure that I can cut all the way through. So that puts the Stihl at a disadvantage. So even though the Stihl saw is cutting a larger cut to make it all the way through the full diameter of this log, we'll see if it can still cut the log faster than the Farmertech. Even though the Stihl cut more wood than the Farmertech, it still managed to cut the log slightly faster.
Log is 11 inches in diameter.
So after doing a few test cuts with both saws on the 11-inch ash log, it looks like the Stihl is only slightly faster on these cuts. Now granted, this will probably be a bigger difference on larger logs, but for small logs, the two saws cut very similar. So after testing these two saws, the moral of the story is that the G660 Pro is not a bad saw for what you pay. It might not be quite as good of a saw as the 661, but at least for the first few gallons of gas, I've been pretty impressed with it. Now, is it going to blow up in a couple trees later down the road? Maybe. I'm sure if it does, I'll make a video out of it and show you guys. But all things considered, I'm pretty happy with the way it performs.
There are a couple nicer features of the 661, like the M-tronic drive I didn't mention in the video. That way you don't need to fiddle around with your carburetor because you actually have a computer chip in there that will do all that for you. But yeah, for a $250 saw, the Holtz Forma is not too bad. I hope you learned something from this video, and thank you for watching.